The laughter echoed through the marble halls of First National Bank as Maya Rodriguez walked out with tears stinging her eyes. The financial advisor had just humiliated her in front of a waiting room full of wealthy clients, dismissing her dreams as unrealistic and her savings as pathetic. What he didn't know was that the quiet man sitting in the corner pretending to read financial reports was about to change everything. The truth about who was really backing Maya's ambitious plans would soon turn that same advisor's world upside down. Maya had always been a fighter, but standing in the pristine lobby of First National Bank that chilly March morning, she felt smaller than she had in years. At 28, she worked double shifts as a house cleaner to support her aging mother and younger brother who was studying engineering. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her calloused hands clutched a worn manila folder containing 3 years' worth of financial documents, business plans and dreams she'd carefully crafted during countless sleepless nights. The bank's atmosphere intimidated her from the moment she stepped through the heavy glass doors. Everything screamed money and privilege, from the polished marble floors to the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. Well-dressed clients in expensive suits glided past her without a second glance, their confident conversations about investments and portfolios making her feel like an outsider in a world she didn't belong to. Maya's dream was simple yet ambitious. She wanted to open a community center in her neighborhood, East Hartford, where kids could get free tutoring, meals and a safe place to spend their afternoons. She'd seen too many children fall through the cracks, their potential wasted because their families couldn't afford the resources that wealthier kids took for granted. After years of saving every spare dollar and researching grant opportunities, she'd managed to accumulate $15,000 and had identified the perfect building. The appointment was scheduled for 10:30 with James Morrison, a senior financial advisor who supposedly specialized in small business loans. Maya had called weeks earlier explaining her situation honestly. She needed a $50,000 loan to cover the building's down payment, renovation costs and initial operating expenses. The receptionist had been polite enough, scheduling the meeting without any indication of what was to come. As Maya sat in the waiting area, she noticed she was the only person not wearing designer clothing. Her best dress, purchased from a discount store 2 years ago, felt shabby compared to the tailored suits and expensive handbags surrounding her. She tried to focus on her breathing, reminding herself that her cause was worthy and her business plan was solid. She'd spent months researching successful community centers, analyzing budgets and projecting income from various funding sources. At exactly 10:45, a tall man in his 50s emerged from an office down the hall. James Morrison looked exactly like what Maya had expected from a bank executive. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit was clearly expensive, and his smile had that practiced quality of someone who dealt with money all day. However, the moment his eyes landed on Maya, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Miss Rodriguez," he called out, though his tone suggested he was hoping she might not be the one to respond. Maya gathered her folder and purse, walking toward him with as much confidence as she could muster. Morrison's handshake was brief and dismissive, and he barely made eye contact as he led her to his office. The space was designed to impress, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, leather furniture and walls lined with awards and certificates that spoke to Morrison's success in the financial world. "So," Morrison began, settling behind his imposing desk without offering Maya anything to drink, "you mentioned something about a loan for a community center." Maya nodded enthusiastically, opening her folder and pulling out her carefully prepared materials. "Yes, I've been planning this for 3 years. East Hartford desperately needs a place where children can get academic support and nutritious meals. I've identified a building that's perfect for the purpose, and I've researched similar successful programs across the state." Morrison barely glanced at the documents she'd placed on his desk. Instead, he leaned back in his chair with an expression that Maya was beginning to recognize as condescending. "And what's your background in business management, Miss Rodriguez?" "I don't have formal business training," Maya admitted, "but I've been volunteering with youth programs for over 5 years. I understand the community's needs, and I've developed relationships with local schools and social services. My business plan shows how we can achieve sustainability through a combination of grants, donations, and fee-based programs for families who can afford them." Morrison picked up one of her documents, scanning it quickly before setting it down with a dismissive gesture. "Ms. Rodriguez, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but running a community center isn't like organizing a bake sale. We're talking about significant financial responsibility here. $50,000 is a substantial amount of money. Maya felt her cheeks burning, but she pressed on. I understand it's a significant investment, which is why I've spent so much time preparing. I have $15,000 in savings to contribute, and I've already secured preliminary interest from 3 grant foundations. The building owner is willing to work with us on financing terms because he believes in the project. $15,000, Morrison repeated, and Maya caught the slight smirk that crossed his face. Miss Rodriguez, some of our clients spend more than that on a weekend vacation. The kind of loan you're requesting requires substantial collateral, proven business experience, and frankly, a more realistic assessment of what's actually achievable. The words stung, but Maya tried to maintain her composure. I believe this project is very achievable. The demographic research shows a clear need, and similar programs in comparable communities have succeeded. I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Morrison. I'm presenting a viable business opportunity that will also serve an important social purpose. Morrison stood up, clearly signaling that the meeting was nearing its end. Look, I'm sure your heart is in the right place, but banking is about numbers, not good intentions. Your income as a house cleaner, while honest work, doesn't demonstrate the financial stability we need to see for this type of loan. The risk is simply too high. Maya felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I've never missed a payment on anything in my life. My credit score is 720. I've saved $15,000 while supporting my family. Doesn't that demonstrate financial responsibility? Miss Rodriguez, Morrison said with exaggerated patience, there's a difference between managing a household budget and running a business that serves hundreds of people. Community centers require ongoing operational funding, liability insurance, staff management, regulatory compliance. These aren't things you learn by watching YouTube videos or reading library books. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable now, and Maya realized that this meeting had been over before it began. Morrison had made his decision based on her appearance and background, not on the merits of her proposal. Still, she made one final attempt. Would you at least review my full business plan? I have financial projections, community impact studies, letters of support from local organizations. I know this can work. Morrison was already moving toward the door. I've seen enough to know this isn't something First National can support. Perhaps you should consider starting smaller, maybe organizing some volunteer activities in your spare time. There are ways to help your community that don't require major financial investment. As they walked back toward the lobby, Maya felt the eyes of other clients on her. Morrison's voice carried, and she was certain that everyone could hear the dismissive tone he was using. The humiliation was complete when they reached the waiting area, and Morrison spoke loudly enough for several people to hear. Miss Rodriguez, I hope you understand that we have a responsibility to our shareholders to make sound lending decisions. Dreams are wonderful things, but they need to be grounded in reality. A few clients actually chuckled at this, and Maya felt her face burning with embarrassment. She clutched her folder tighter and managed to thank Morrison for his time, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. As she turned to leave, she noticed a man sitting in the corner of the waiting area, who hadn't been there when she arrived. He was probably in his early 40s, wearing a simple gray sweater and dark jeans that looked expensive but understated. Unlike the other clients, he wasn't checking his phone or reviewing documents. Instead, he seemed to be watching the interaction between Maya and Morrison with intense interest. When Maya caught his eye, he offered a small sympathetic smile that felt genuine in a way that Morrison's practiced expressions never had. Maya hurried toward the exit, desperate to escape before the tears started falling in earnest. She pushed through the heavy doors and found herself back on the busy street, feeling like she'd been kicked while she was down. 3 years of planning, saving and hoping had just been dismissed in 20 minutes by a man who couldn't see past her appearance and background. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, trying to collect herself before heading home. Her mother would be waiting to hear how the meeting went, and Maya wasn't sure how she'd explain that their neighborhood would have to wait a little longer for the help it needed. The rejection hurt, but it was Morrison's casual cruelty that really stung. He'd treated her like her dreams were childish fantasies rather than carefully researched plans. As Maya started walking toward the bus stop, she didn't notice the man in the gray sweater emerge from the bank behind her. He watched her figure disappear into the crowd, then pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. "Sarah, it's me," he said quietly. "I need you to put together a complete financial profile on First National Bank. Everything their net worth, major shareholders, upcoming deals, vulnerabilities, and I want it by tomorrow morning." Inside the bank, James Morrison was already back at his desk, probably forgetting about Maya Rodriguez and her community center dreams. He had no way of knowing that the quiet man who'd witnessed his performance was someone who could buy and sell First National Bank without thinking twice about it. More importantly, he had no idea that the woman he'd just humiliated was about to become the most important person in that man's life. The story was just beginning, and Morrison's comfortable world was about to be turned completely upside down. The man in the gray sweater watched Maya disappear into the crowd before pulling out his phone. His name was David Chen, and while his appearance suggested nothing more than comfortable middle-class living, the reality was far different. David was the founder and CEO of Chen Industries, a technology conglomerate worth $12 billion. More importantly, he'd just witnessed something that made his blood boil. David had come to First National that morning for a routine meeting about a potential acquisition. His company was considering purchasing several smaller tech firms, and the bank was facilitating some of the financing arrangements. He'd arrived early and decided to wait in the lobby rather than interrupt the meeting that was clearly running over schedule in the conference room. What he'd witnessed between Morrison and Maya wasn't just unprofessional, it was exactly the kind of systemic discrimination that David had fought against his entire career. As the son of immigrants, who'd built his fortune from nothing, he understood what it felt like to be dismissed because of how you looked or where you came from. But unlike Maya, David now had the power to do something about it. He made his first call to Sarah Martinez, his chief financial officer and closest advisor. Sarah had been with David since the early days of Chen Industries, and she understood his values better than anyone. When David explained what he'd witnessed, Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. "I'll have everything you need by morning," Sarah said. "Net worth, debt structure, major shareholders, board composition, recent performance metrics. If this bank has any vulnerabilities, we'll find them." David's second call was to his head of security and investigation, Marcus Thompson. David needed to know more about Maya Rodriguez, not to exploit her situation, but to understand how he could help. Within hours, Marcus had compiled a comprehensive but respectful profile that painted a picture of a remarkable young woman who'd overcome significant obstacles. Maya's father had died when she was 16, leaving her to help support her mother who suffered from chronic health issues. Despite this, Maya had graduated high school with honors and earned a partial scholarship to State University. She dropped out after 2 years when her mother's condition worsened, but she'd never stopped learning or dreaming. The community center project wasn't just an idea, it was a carefully researched plan that addressed real problems in East Hartford. Marcus's report also revealed something that made David's respect for Maya grow even deeper. Despite her financial struggles, Maya regularly volunteered at 3 different community organizations. She tutored children in reading and math, served meals at a homeless shelter, and organized clothing drives for families in need. This was someone who understood service and sacrifice in ways that James Morrison couldn't comprehend. By the next morning, Sarah had assembled a complete financial picture of First National Bank. The institution was profitable but not spectacularly so. They had significant exposure to commercial real estate loans that were becoming increasingly risky, and their customer satisfaction ratings had been declining for 3 consecutive years. Most importantly, the bank was family-owned, with 60% of shares controlled by the Morrison Family Trust. David spent the weekend developing his strategy. He could have simply bought the bank outright, but that would have been too obvious and potentially harmful to innocent employees. Instead, he crafted a more elegant approach that would achieve his goals while actually strengthening the institution. On Monday morning, David walked into First National wearing one of his best suits. This time he wasn't the quiet observer in the corner. He was David Chen, CEO of Chen Industries, and he had an appointment with the bank's president, Robert Morrison, James Morrison's older brother and the man who ultimately controlled the family business. Robert Morrison was everything. His brother wasn't sophisticated, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in building long-term relationships rather than just closing deals. David had done his research on Robert as well. The man was known for his integrity and his commitment to community banking, values that were sometimes at odds with his brother's more aggressive approach. "Mr. Chen," Robert said, rising from behind his desk to shake hands, "it's an honor to meet you. I have to admit, when your office called to request a meeting, I was surprised. I wouldn't have expected someone of your stature to work with a regional bank like ours." David smiled warmly. "Mr. Morrison, I've built my business on the principle that character matters more than size. I'm interested in establishing a comprehensive banking relationship with an institution that shares my values." They spent the first hour discussing David's business needs. Chen Industries was looking to consolidate their banking relationships, and they needed services ranging from routine cash management to complex international transactions. The potential account would be worth hundreds of millions in assets and generate substantial fee income for First National. Robert was clearly excited about the opportunity, but David could see the man's natural caution as well. Deals that seemed too good to be true often were, and Robert had built his reputation on careful decision-making. "I have to ask, Mr. Chen," Robert said diplomatically, "what specifically attracted you to First National? I'm sure larger institutions have courted your business." David had prepared for this question. "I believe in community banking, Mr. Morrison. I've seen what happens when financial institutions lose sight of their responsibility to serve all members of their community, not just the wealthy ones." He paused, studying Robert's reaction carefully. "In fact, I witnessed something here last week that concerned me. One of your advisors was meeting with a young woman who had a legitimate business proposal, and the way she was treated was disappointing." Robert's expression darkened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Can you tell me more about what you observed?" David recounted the interaction between James Morrison and Maya, being careful to stick to the facts without editorial commentary. He described the dismissive attitude, the public humiliation, and the missed opportunity to seriously evaluate what appeared to be a worthwhile project. "The woman had clearly done her homework," David explained. "She'd prepared financial projections, researched comparable programs, and identified realistic funding sources. Instead of receiving a professional evaluation, she was essentially told that her dreams were unrealistic because of her background and income level." Robert was quiet for several minutes, processing what David had told him. Finally he spoke with obvious frustration in his voice. "Mr. Chen, I owe you an apology. What you've described is completely contrary to our stated values and policies. This bank was built on the principle of serving all members of our community, and that includes people who are trying to improve their circumstances and help others." David nodded approvingly. "I'm glad to hear that, because I'd like to propose something that might address the situation while also establishing our business relationship." He outlined his idea with careful precision. Chen Industries would make a substantial deposit with First National, but with specific conditions attached. Part of the funds would be designated for a new community development loan program that would specifically serve projects like Maya's Community Center. The program would be administered by the bank but funded by David's company, eliminating the risk to First National while ensuring that worthy projects receive proper consideration. "I'm also prepared to make a significant equity investment in the bank itself," David continued. "I'm not looking for control or management authority, but I do want to ensure that First National continues to embody the values that make community banking important." Robert was clearly intrigued but cautious. "What kind of equity investment are we discussing?" "I'm prepared to purchase 40% of the bank's outstanding shares at a premium to current market value," David said calmly. "This would make me the largest single shareholder, but the Morrison family would retain control and all management decisions would remain with your team." The number was staggering. Based on the bank's current valuation, David was offering to pay nearly $200 million for less than half ownership in a regional bank. Robert's hands were actually shaking as he processed the magnitude of the proposal. "Chen, I have to ask why you'd make such a generous offer. This is far beyond what would be required to establish a banking relationship." David leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "Mr. Morrison, I've been fortunate in business, but I've never forgotten where I came from. My parents arrived in this country with nothing but determination and hope. They faced discrimination and dismissal from people who couldn't see past their accents and their circumstances." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Last week, I watched your brother treat a young woman the same way my parents were treated 40 years ago. The difference is that now I have the resources to do something about it." Robert sat in stunned silence as the implications became clear. His brother's behavior hadn't just cost the bank a potential customer, it had attracted the attention of someone who could reshape their entire future. "I want to be clear," David continued. "This isn't about revenge or punishment, it's about ensuring that institutions like yours live up to their stated values. I believe First National can be a model for how community banks should operate, but that requires leadership that understands service means serving everyone, not just the wealthy." The meeting continued for another 2 hours as they discussed the details of the proposed arrangement. David's lawyers had already prepared the necessary documentation pending Robert's approval. The Community Development Loan Program would launch immediately with $5 million in funding. Maya's community center project would be the first loan reviewed under the new program, with the understanding that it would be evaluated solely on its merits. By the time David left the bank, Robert Morrison had agreed to consider the proposal seriously. More importantly, he'd also agreed to immediately review the bank's lending policies and customer service standards. James Morrison would be required to attend sensitivity training and would no longer handle community development loans. That afternoon, Maya received a call that changed her life forever. The voice on the phone identified herself as Lisa Park, a loan officer with First National Bank's new community development program. Miss Rodriguez, we've received your loan application for the East Hartford Community Center project and we'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss the details, Lisa said professionally. Maya was confused. She hadn't submitted a formal application beyond the documents she'd left with Morrison, and she certainly hadn't heard about any community development program. I'm not sure I understand, Maya said carefully. I met with Mr. Morrison last week and he made it clear that the bank couldn't help with my project. Lisa's voice was warm and reassuring. There have been some changes in how we evaluate community-focused projects, Miss Rodriguez. We've established a new loan program specifically designed to support initiatives like yours. Would you be available to meet tomorrow morning? Maya's hands were shaking as she hung up the phone. She didn't understand what had changed, but she was willing to hope that maybe, somehow, her dreams might still be possible. The next morning, Maya returned to First National Bank, but this time everything was different. Lisa Park met her in the lobby personally, apologizing for the confusion during her previous visit and escorting her to a comfortable conference room rather than an intimidating executive office. Miss Rodriguez, I've had a chance to review your materials in detail and I have to say I'm impressed by the thoroughness of your planning. Lisa began. Your demographic research clearly demonstrates the need for this type of facility in East Hartford, and your financial projections are realistic and well supported. Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes. After days of disappointment and self-doubt, someone was finally taking her seriously. I do have some questions about your operational plan, Lisa continued, but they're the kind of details we can work through together. The most important thing is that you've identified a genuine community need and developed a viable approach to addressing it. They spent 2 hours going through Maya's proposal line by line. Lisa asked thoughtful questions about staffing, programming, safety protocols, and sustainability planning. Unlike Morrison's dismissive attitude, these were the questions of someone who wanted to help Maya succeed. Based on our conversation today, I'm prepared to recommend approval for your loan request, Lisa said finally. The terms will be very favorable, $50,000 at 3% interest with a flexible repayment schedule that allows for the seasonal variations typical in nonprofit funding. Maya couldn't speak. She'd dreamed of this moment for 3 years, but she'd never imagined it would actually happen. There is one condition, Lisa added gently. Our community development program requires that loan recipients participate in a mentorship component. You'll be paired with a local business leader who can provide guidance and support as you launch your center. Maya nodded eagerly. She was grateful for any help she could get, especially from someone with real business experience. Your mentor will be David Chen from Chen Industries, Lisa said. He's specifically requested to work with community center projects and he has extensive experience with nonprofit organizations. The name meant nothing to Maya, but she was grateful nonetheless. A week later, she met David at a small coffee shop near the site she'd chosen for her community center. He was wearing the same understated gray sweater she'd noticed at the bank, and his manner was warm but humble. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Maya, David said, using her first name naturally. I'm looking forward to learning about your project. As Maya explained her vision for the community center, David listened with the same intense attention she'd noticed that day in the bank lobby. He asked thoughtful questions about her background, her connection to the neighborhood, and her long-term goals for the facility. You know, Maya, what strikes me most about your plan is how deeply you understand the community you want to serve, David said. That kind of authentic connection is something you can't fake or learn from textbooks. Over the following months, David proved to be more than just a mentor. He became a true partner in Maya's vision. He helped her navigate the complexities of nonprofit management, introduced her to other community leaders, and provided resources that went far beyond what any normal business mentor would offer. The East Hartford Community Center opened 6 months later to a crowd of over 300 people. Children ran through the bright, welcoming spaces while their parents explored the resource library and meeting rooms. Local officials praised the facility as exactly what the neighborhood needed, and waiting lists for programs filled up within days. Maya still didn't know the full truth about David's wealth or his role in her loan approval. As far as she was concerned, he was simply a successful businessman who cared about his community. David preferred it that way. He'd learned that the most meaningful relationships were built on mutual respect and shared values, not on financial disparity. James Morrison, meanwhile, had undergone a significant transformation of his own. The sensitivity training had been eye-opening, but the real change came when he volunteered at Maya's community center and saw firsthand the impact of her work. The children who came there for tutoring and meals weren't statistics on a loan application, they were bright, eager kids who just needed someone to believe in their potential. Morrison approached Maya 6 months after the center opened during one of her regular visits to the bank to review the center's financial status. "Miss Rodriguez, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "The way I treated you during our first meeting was unprofessional and wrong. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and I nearly cost our community something valuable." Maya accepted his apology graciously, understanding that people could change when they opened themselves to new perspectives. First National Bank thrived under its new community-focused approach. David's investment had provided stability and resources, while the Community Development Loan Program had generated positive publicity and new customers who appreciated the bank's commitment to local growth. Robert Morrison often credited the transformation to David's influence, not knowing that David's real motivation had been protecting someone who'd been treated unfairly. 2 years after the community center opened, Maya was invited to speak at a statewide conference on community development. Her presentation about building grassroots support and sustainable programming drew a standing ovation from an audience of nonprofit leaders, government officials, and business executives. After her speech, David approached her with a smile that seemed different, somehow warmer and more personal than his usual professional demeanor. "Maya, I have something to tell you," he said, guiding her to a quiet corner of the conference center. "I haven't been completely honest about how we first met." Maya felt a flutter of concern, wondering what revelation was coming. "I was at First National that morning when you met with Morrison," David explained gently. "I saw how he treated you, and it reminded me of experiences I'd had when people judged me based on appearances rather than substance." The pieces began falling into place in Maya's mind. "You're the reason the bank called me back, aren't you?" David nodded. "I convinced them to create the community development program, and I made sure your project was the first one they considered. But everything after that, your success, your impact, the way you've built something meaningful, that's all been your doing." Maya was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. Finally, she looked up at David with an expression of gratitude mixed with something else. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I wanted our relationship to be real," David said simply. "I wanted you to know me as someone who believed in your work, not as someone who felt sorry for you or was trying to impress you with his resources." Over the following months, Maya and David's partnership deepened into something more personal. They discovered shared values around service, community, and using their abilities to help others. David's wealth never became the focus of their relationship. Instead, it was simply one of many tools they used to make their shared vision a reality. A year later, when David proposed to Maya in the children's reading room of the community center she'd built, it wasn't a billionaire asking a former house cleaner to marry him. It was two people who'd found each other through their commitment to making the world a little better. The wedding was held in the community center's gymnasium, with decorations made by the children Maya tutored and food prepared by families from the neighborhood. James Morrison attended, bringing a generous donation to the center's scholarship fund. Robert Morrison served as David's best man, having become close friends with the couple over the months of working together. Maya's mother, who'd watched her daughter fight for her dreams with quiet pride, gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "My daughter has always believed that everyone deserves a chance to succeed," she said, looking around the room filled with people from all walks of life. "Today we celebrate not just her wedding but the proof that when we treat each other with dignity and respect, amazing things can happen." As Maya and David danced to their first song as husband and wife, surrounded by the community they'd helped build together, it was clear that their story was about much more than wealth or status. It was about the power of believing in people's potential, the importance of treating everyone with respect, and the beautiful things that can happen when someone with resources uses them to lift others up rather than to show off. The East Hartford Community Center continued to thrive, eventually expanding to serve over 800 children and families annually. David's community development program at First National became a model copied by banks across the region, and Maya was appointed to the state's Community Development Advisory Board, where she helped shape policies that made it easier for grassroots organizations to access funding and support. James Morrison eventually left banking to become the center's full-time development director, using his financial skills to help Maya expand her programs and secure long-term sustainability. His transformation from dismissive banker to passionate advocate became its own inspiration story within their community. But perhaps the most important outcome was the message their story sent to others. In a world where people are often judged by their appearance, background, or economic status, Maya and David proved that true value lies in character, compassion, and the willingness to work for something bigger than yourself. The little community center in East Hartford became a symbol of what's possible when people choose to see potential instead of limitations, when institutions remember their responsibility to serve everyone, and when those who have been blessed with success use their gifts to create opportunities for others. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.